Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Jack Amplified. Every week, we have incredible guests who bare their souls, share their stories. They're incredibly brave, they're incredibly brilliant. I get inspired every week by our guests. This week is no different. Before we get to those guests, I just want to talk about this week's theme a little bit. I remember, listen, I'm fairly old, right? But I remember back during exam time, the stress that was on my shoulders, right? You'd be in the hallway and you'd be about to go in. This is when you actually had to physically go in and do that. I don't know if you have to do that anymore. We'll find out from our guests. And there'd be someone, all these people running around, similarly stressed, and someone would yell out, hey, did you study this? And then you'd start to panic because you didn't. And you're like, oh no, should I look that up? And that would just throw you off and you throw off your game. And it was a mess, right? Like the stress on students. And that has only grown, has become more competitive over time. And I just, man, I can't imagine the stress that young people are under right now, how that affects their mental health. And we want to talk about that today. And that is our theme, is academic stress, because as you listen to this is exam time, of course, and post-secondary, which is extremely stressful time. So why does it matter? Why are we talking about this? Well, hey, listen, we want to normalize open conversation around academic pressure and challenge the idea that grades define worth, right? Titles, grades, all that doesn't define who you are. It doesn't define your worth. It doesn't make you better or worse. And we want to talk about that today. So remember, you are not your grades. Academic success absolutely matters, of course, and it's incredible, but your mental health and sense of self are far more important. And you are not alone in feeling this pressure. You'll hear that from our guests today. And sometimes just knowing you're not alone is that is what you need to hear. Oh, someone else, you feel that way? Wow, I see myself in you. You feel that way. It's going to be okay. So let me get to today's wonderful guest. We have our friend Karl. So Karl was born in Kingston, Ontario. He recently graduated from the University of Waterloo and Wilfrid Laurier University with a double degree. Wow. In computer science and business administration. Congratulations, Karl. Outside of work, if he has any spare time, as an AI, so outside of his work as an AI product analyst in Ottawa, Karl enjoys basketball, hockey, swimming, and baking. I just said banking for says baking. Good for you. That's like you're all sports, and then boom, you can make a sourdough. That's amazing. So welcome, Karl. And we also have Lily. Welcome, Lily. Lily is a psychology graduate from the University of Ottawa and works as a project and administrative assistant at the Life Research Institute. Gives life. It sounds huge. She's passionate about mental health, equity, diversity, inclusion, and community engagement, drawing on her professional and lived experiences to create meaningful impact in spaces where people feel seen, heard, and valued. In her free time, she loves diving into self-help books, practicing mindfulness, and giving back to her community, especially through her work at Jack.org. Yes, great work, Lily. And finally, of course, we have, last but not least, we have Brooklyn. And Brooklyn is a fourth-year medical student at Northern Ontario School of Medicine, applying for residency in psychiatry. That is incredible. And man, you hear it time and time again. Not only do we need more psychiatrists, there's a lack of them, but we need amazing, great, young, and brilliant psychiatrists like Brooklyn. Based in Thunder Bay, Ontario, she's been a dedicated Jack.org speaker for several years, sharing her experiences with academic pressure to empower youth. In her free time, she enjoys reading and spin classes. Hey, Brooklyn, just a little known fact about me. When I worked at the YMCA for many, many years, I taught two different classes. I'm pretty uncoordinated, so I couldn't do like typical aerobics classes, so I could do two things. Spinning was the cool one. I was really proud of that. I loved to teach spin. Those were fun classes. But I could always see people cheating, right? Because you control your tension on the bike. People look like they're giving it their all, but really they have no tension on the bike. And the other one, which wasn't as cool, was aquafit, because the average age in aquafit is usually, people above 70. But I was a rock star in that class. But aquafit and spinning were my two things. So good for you for taking those classes. Welcome, 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 all of you, to Jack Amplified.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Awesome. I love these panels, and we so appreciate that you're bringing forward, taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. So we want to talk about what academic stress looks like. Hey, Lily, I'm going to look to you first. What does it look like and feel like for you?
Yeah, no, thank you, Michael. And thank you for the wonderful introductions as well. It's super appreciated. Before I dive into what it looks like for me, I just wanted to start by saying I feel like there is a little bit of a negative, connotation around stress, that it's a bad thing, that it's a negative thing. And I feel like it's important to start just by saying that, it's not inherently bad and it can actually be a very normal and natural response to challenges that we may be facing in life. And that includes very high performance driven environments like school. So I wanted to start off just by saying that, and saying in some cases, not all cases, it can be helpful. And I find for me, when I think of stress, I'm often stressed when it means something to me, when it's meaningful, when it matters. And I think that also, if you're looking at it from that different perspective, it can be something really beautiful too, that it's kind of encompassed with care, at least from my experiences. But I will say that when it becomes more prolonged, intense, or feels uncontrollable, that's when it really becomes more distress. And that's when it can take a more significant toll on our health. But to answer your question, coming back to that, circling back, for me, when I'm stressed, it feels like almost there's this button that's on in my brain that's constantly racing with thoughts. I'll have some worries, whether it's thinking about deadlines or about that next exam that I would have been taking. And I can't really switch it off or take a real break. And as you can imagine, that's really an exhausting feeling to kind of be having and encountering. So it's definitely a struggle. It's not easy being a student by any means. And when I look back now, I feel like I was almost kind of on autopilot, really focused on doing, 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 but not really present in what I was doing necessarily, and enjoying what I was doing and learning just because I love learning, and I do love learning. So I think when I look back, it's important to recognize that these different signs in ourselves for stress, we need to acknowledge what they are within ourselves, and to be able to almost, I would say, know that they look different person to person, and that they may come up. And if you're at an academic environment, they likely will. And you're not alone in feeling those feelings, like you were saying. So just kind of checking in with ourselves from time to time and employing those different stress management techniques and making sure we're seeking support, I think is so important, especially when we're feeling stressed, and kind of easing into that distress category as well. It's even more important as well. So hopefully that answers your question, Michael.
Absolutely. Brilliantly said. And thank you so much for sharing. I want to talk a little bit about expectations. They just weigh on people. Part of the stress is stress we put on ourselves, but the expectations, maybe it's from the school itself, from family, from culture. And those expectations, they shape the way, you define yourself sometimes. So how do expectations from all those things shape the way you define success? Karl, the question is to you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that, and amazing response as well. So, in terms of my own personal experience, I feel like society has given myself and my counterparts, my peers, youth in general today, really, really high expectations, right? And adding comparison, it just creates a lot of unnecessary stress for a lot of youth and a lot of students. And it's like how the old saying goes, right? Comparison is the thief of joy. So, especially with a lot of programs and a lot of courses, right? There's always someone that you're comparing yourself to, right? You're like, "Hey, I have this classmate who does really, really well on this test, right? I want to be like them." And it adds additional stress to yourself. It gives you that additional barrier in a sense almost to reaching that, and so I would say that's one aspect of these unnecessary expectations. Another aspect is that there's for example, if don't do well on the test, and I know that my classmate did really, really well on the test, then I'm gonna be like, they're gonna get that co-op opportunity, or they're gonna get that research opportunity with their professor or whoever, right? And I'm gonna feel really, really bad. So that also gives us that expectation on ourselves, right? I want to do the best I can so that I can maximize all the opportunities, because unfortunately, with how it works, with how the world works, there are only a limited number of opportunities available to us. So that's also a really high expectation a lot of a lot of my peers and myself put on us. We want to do the best because we want those opportunities. We want to be the best we can, right? And then just one final aspect I really wanted to talk about was how culture also plays a major factor in this, right? Like for me personally, coming from a East Asian background, coming from a family where academics was also just truly valued and put above a lot of other things, um, there was just that expectation that we had to do really, really well on our tests and that there was no room for failure. We had to go to extra classes, perhaps on the weekends, to support our learning. And there's also a lot of expectation and a lot of unnecessary stress put on ourselves by our families, by our parents, and things like that. So that's one thing that I also would recommend to students. Just at the end of the day, you are your own person, right? Don't compare yourself to others. Don't let comparison take away the joy of how you perform. And as long as you try your best, in the end, whether you get that opportunity or you don't, you know yourself personally that you gave it your all. And that's what is the most important, especially in today's society.
Well said, and thank you for that. And I see that. I mean, I think the cultural piece, it comes from a good place where if you're the best at this, if you score high, you'll get a better job, you'll get a better schools, you'll get a better job, you'll make more money, life will be easier, right? Like that's kind of the thought process, but the pressure that can put on someone too. I think we have to remember too is that not all of us learn the same way, right? And I'll tell you personally, university was really tough for me because to sit in a lecture hall, that's not how I learn. Like to take it in that way. So I had to use a trick back. It is before phones, like that. I had that distraction. I would sit in the front row, so I was eye level with the professor because then I couldn't drift off or mess because they're basically staring at you the whole lecture, right? So, which is not the cool spot to be. It's still like everyone wants to sit in the back, but that was something we don't all learn the same way. A lot of people are hands-on learners. Some people are visual, some are audio, right? But we're all taught the same way. So it's the pressure. You could feel that a little bit different too. I was going to say too. I remember. So I don't know if any of you were part of the IB programs in high school, but man, my daughter got into that, and she was that is how she identified herself. She was very proud of it. I'm an IB student in IB and IB. She kept saying that, right? And she went through first year and she was having like tough time with her mental health. And second year. And I remember going to a parent, this speaks to the cultural piece too, and a parent student piece on second year. And the parents were just so intense on can my daughter or son take physics in summer school? Can they get ahead? Can they get man, or could they just have a break and have a good day? And I remember turning to my daughter saying, you don't have to do this, eh? And it was like a weight was just lifted off her. She didn't. She didn't continue on. And she became a different person because we allowed her. We never forced her into it. But we allowed her for us to kind of take that decision out of her hands, and she was free from that. But I just remember that the pressure. And they would say, if you do IB, it's like, and you go all the way through, it's like first year university is already done. I'm like, but she's 17. Like, why do you want first year to be done? To Lily's point is like, don't you want to learn? Like, I don't want to skip a year. I actually want to learn and get that and do. So yeah, it's crazy. Sorry to wonder, but it just that pressure in those pieces that you've all kind of alluded to. So we've talked about the stress. We want to talk a little bit about how we manage that. So what helps you manage stress during exam season? And Brooklyn, I want to go over to you for some thoughts around that.
Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you for sharing your perspective as a parent and kind of how you can navigate and help support in the realm of stress and overwhelm. As you mentioned in your wonderful introduction, I think stress and worries about school are something that everyone, experiences today, navigating the school and the educational system. So I've developed some strategies and skills I found to be beneficial through my personal experience of that. And the first actually ties into something that Lily had mentioned at the beginning, talking about kind of reframing stress and anxiety as something that might be beneficial or helpful. I remember I got a really meaningful piece of advice when I was starting medical school, and it was from a counselor who mentioned that at times, if you feel like this resonates and it is appropriate for you, viewing stress as an excitement to show our learning, to perform and demonstrate how far we've come, can be a really meaningful way of kind of reframing how the heaviness of stress can sit in our bodies, how the expectations of our peers, ourselves, our family can weigh in on us, and kind of reframe it into a positive lens. Granted, that doesn't always work and feel right sometimes. So when I really can't get out of the mindset of this feels stressful, I feel overwhelmed, I try and find other ways to make the workload manageable. Some things I like to do in that realm really focus on balancing or multitasking, not in a traditional way of trying to get as many things done as possible, but more so, I've heard the term habit stacking being used before, and I find that to be something really helpful for me. So if I know I need to study for an exam and I'm really putting off reviewing the notes and that feels overwhelming, I might almost romanticize that, and maybe I'll light a little candle. Maybe I'll have a beverage like a chai tea, maybe I'll make a matcha, maybe I'll put on an eye mask, something to try and kind of reduce the scariness that starting or facing our fears in terms of, this obstacle in the way can present. And other things I like to do kind of focus on setting aside time wherever possible to carve out protected time for recharging, talking to friends, making sure that school or academic performance isn't on my mind. I can watch a show, read a book, go to a spin class. And I also like to just remind myself of the mantra, I've done hard things before and I can do hard things again. And I find that having affirmative statements like that have been really helpful just to put in perspective how far we've all come as learners and as students, and the fact that we can do hard things. We've seen that through our history. We know that we can face the next obstacle, even if it feels really scary and it gives us a pit in our stomach. We know that we can always make it through the hard tasks in front of us. So I find those to be the strategies that really help me navigate academic stress and burnout.
Amazing. I love the reframing piece and then just kind of changing the way the approach that you're taking when you're kind of tackling those pieces. Lily, how about yourself? How do you manage stress? Academic stress.
No, absolutely. And I love all that you were talking about, Brooklyn. That so resonates. And I feel like that's such a great way to kind of approach stress and pressure that exam times bring. So I love that. When I was thinking about this, I think of almost like a toolbox, where you want to be putting all these different tools into your toolbox and, for the challenges of life, not just academic, like pressure and stress, because it really applies everywhere. And I feel like when you have the right tools, that can be so meaningful. And the one tool that I really wanted to mention that I think is so, so, so important that I would choose in my toolbox every day is self-care. I think that it doesn't really matter so much what you do, so much as like that you're doing it consistently. So when you're like doing it on a daily basis, when you really are engaging in something that makes you happy, that brings joy into your life, that brings some relief, because it can be a lot. Um, Even if it's just for a few minutes, it doesn't have to be super duper time consuming, but doing that on a daily basis can, I found, made a really big difference in my life, especially when you're doing it over a period of time. So just to give some examples, and knowing that everyone has different ones, as we've seen from Brooklyn and I, we probably have different food preferences in the same way that we have different passions. So that's the same for things that will work to manage our stress during exam season. But for me, stretching, having a glass of tea, or setting boundaries. I love rolling essential oils on my, on my body and diffusing them into the air. I think that that's super, it really calms down me. So I really enjoy that personally. And I will say mindfulness has had such a big role in my life. You can accompany it kind of like with what you're saying in terms of habits too. But even just taking a few moments to be aware of what you're actually doing and being present, that's something I really struggled with while I was in school. But that could be while you're eating or while you're walking or while you're talking with a friend or a family member or doing dishes. Like there's so many different ways that you can incorporate this into your life. And by doing so, it can really just like allow you to be I'm just doing this, like, like let all of those other thoughts kind of go away and just be. So I really love that. And I'll just add one little tidbit left of thought. Um, it kind of comes off of what Brooklyn was saying as well. But for me, organizing my thoughts was so important and powerful in my journey. So I love making lists. I love writing things down. That's been really important for my journey. And I, I would engage in writing stress lists because I would often stress about not knowing what I was stressed about at all. So I would just engage in these different stress lists where I would write down every single thing that was stressing me out, and I would divide it into two different categories, one of which things that I could control and the other of things that I couldn't. And from the list that I could control, I would write down a to-do list of what I could do and putting it into like very simple tasks that I could check off easily, making them very simplistic, not super complex, and big goals, small goals. But also implementing that. But for those that I couldn't control, as you can imagine, those are a little bit more difficult because they don't just, you can't just X them off your to-do list in the same way as things that you can actually control. But for me, I really liked implementing affirmations and implementing reframing thoughts around that idea, implementing different perspectives of, what that looked like. Like, if I couldn't control something, how could I look at it in a different way? And I feel like that was really helpful for me. So creating stress lists, I found on my journey was super helpful because I honestly, in school, sometimes it's hard to know what you're even stressed about because there are so many stressors. So stress lists were my way of kind of coping with all of those different things going on in life. And I really enjoyed engaging in that to help me feel like I had more control and a sense of calm and peace.
Love that. I love that. Here's what I can do. Here's what I can't. The stress list, folks, it works. And listen, before we go to the next question, we're going to go to a little commercial break.
Hi, I'm Angelica, a program lead with Jack.org. I get to see firsthand every day the impact our network of youth advocates have on young people across the country. It's why I do what I do. Preparing them to share their journeys takes time, care, and support. Your contribution helps us continue to provide safe spaces for young people to be heard and to face the youth mental health crisis head-on. Help us reach even more youth with stories of inspiration and hope by visiting jack.org/donate today. Check out the link below.
And we're back. So let's talk about Jack.org. Is all about peer-to-peer working through it, right? And because if someone like me gets up and talks to young people, like, maybe you're a nice guy, but you're not relatable, right? Like, how could you possibly know what we're going through at this point? So we do peer to peer, and we try and build this ecosystem of young people that can support one another. So on that theme, I wanted to talk about how peers or communities help you feel supported or less alone. Karl, question to you.
Thank you so much, Michael, and amazing responses from the last question, Brooklyn and Lily. Thank you so much for your insight. In terms of how I found peers and communities to have been a major support for me, is that it gives me a channel, an outlet where I can find people that share the same passions as me or share the same hobbies as me, and gives me that sense of belonging in that community. And it's made a huge difference in my life so far. Like, for example, for me personally, I love to play sports and love being active, love to go on walks, hikes, runs. And every time when I was stressed, right, when I was just overwhelmed by the amount of tasks I had to do, or just stressed in both academic and non-academic contexts. I would go on a run, go on a hike, or go on a walk with a couple of friends, a couple of people in those communities. We would have regular pickup basketball games. We would have regular volleyball games together, and it became that channel, that outlet for not only myself but also the peers in these communities to just vent about everything that's been going on in their days and just find an outlet to channel their stress in, because nothing beats shooting a puck at a net to channel and unleash your stress, right? Or nothing beats the thrill of making a 3-point shot from half court, right? So these small
I don't
moments.
know that thrill, Carl. I never make those. Sorry. Go ahead.
No worries, no worries. That's something that we can practice for sure, right? But um, just like these small little things in these different activities that we enjoy can just create that thrill and create that excitement, create that joy in our lives. And by having these small moments, it really makes our days. It makes us forget about everything that we have ongoing, and it gives us that moment of peace and that sense of belongingness. So that's something that I really, really enjoy. And I would also highly recommend to all the students and to the listeners seeing or watching this to join different clubs, right? To join different teams, activities on campus, different organizations. Find the peers in the community that aligns with your best interests, aligns with your interests, aligns with your hobbies, and just be a part of that. Because if you're going through something, if you're going through stress, chances are they also have stress from their courses. And by being part of this community, it really gives you that opportunity to just share, de-stress together, and enjoy life together. So, highly recommend join as many clubs as you can, join as many organizations, and make the most out of these communities to help support you along the way.
Sage advice, Carl. Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you off with a 3-point comment. Maybe think of that. And I also was glad when you said shoot a puck at. I thought you were going to say one of your friends, but you said the net, which is the correct response, right?
Yes.
Very good. Listen, we want your honest advice on this, and that is, what advice would you share with students who feel their grades define their worth? Who are like, if I don't get 100% on this, if I don't get an A, if I don't get, then I'm nothing. Brooklyn, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So to that point, I think it's important to first acknowledge that that is valid to feel that way. We've all had thoughts where we feel like our worth is inherent based on a grade. Could also be based on how many friends you have, how much money you have in the bank, all of these very measurable factors. It's normal to feel like our worth might be based on that because sometimes that's messaging that we might receive from externally or even internally. But one thing that I find really important to remind myself is that worth is not measurable in these metrics that we're told. It's not possible that you can have enough friends that you're never going to experience hardship or go through hard things. It's not possible that getting a 100% in this class reflects anything beyond the fact that you got a 100% on a certain test. And so one thing I think that's really beneficial for me to remember is that your worth is so reliant on you internally. How can you find sources that validate and that encourage that self-worth? By reflecting inwards, by thinking about, one thing I always think about is how people perceive you. People are not going to remember if you got a 100% on an exam or a 60% on an exam in 10 years' time, but they will remember how you treated them, how you interacted, your energy, your kindness, the things that make you so unique, the things that are your worth, your value, whether it's your humor, your kindness, your outgoingness, your willingness to help others. I think, though it's very difficult, I really encourage people to try and find those internal metrics of self-worth and to really lean into that, even though it can feel really hard and at times it can be really difficult to identify those metrics. I think it's really helpful if we can find those internal motivations and those internal pillars of self-worth to really kind of combat these external pressures and these other metrics that we're told we need to base our self-worth on. So I find that really focusing internally seems to be a beneficial skill for me, and I hope resonates with any listeners today.
Beautifully said. Some of the most brilliant people in the world have great educations, right? Like a degree or a test or a mark doesn't define us, as you said. Those metrics that you talked about really make up your worth. And so I love that. I hope people take that to heart. Thank you so much for that, Brooklyn. Now we're going to go do a segment we call From the Front Lines. So I'm going to ask each of you to share a story and about a coping strategy that helped you manage your academic pressure. So Karl, if I could start with you, then we'll go to Brooklyn, and last but not least, Lily, we're gonna finish with you. And just share a story that means a lot to you on how you dealt with academic pressure.
For sure. Thank you so much, Mike, for that question. In terms of a memorable experience I had personally was during the pandemic, a lot of my courses were all online, and it seemed like the mix of life and academics was becoming more and more blurred with every growing day. So to me, it was like I would wake up in the morning and I'd open my computer and I just do courses, and then after dinner it would just be more courses, and everything just blended all in, and it was just there was no sense of work-life balance or school-life balance anymore, and that was something that I didn't really know how to deal with, right? Because this was just a once in a lifetime experience, right? Having the pandemic occur. So something that I found really, really useful during that time was to use different planning tools. And this is something that Brooklyn and Lily have also alluded to. For me personally, I'm a really old school kind of person. I love using paper and pen just to jot down everything. But for those students and those listeners who are more tech savvy or who like to use different tools on a computer or on a phone, there's Notion, there's Google Calendar. All of these tools are really, really beneficial. But for me, I used paper and pen. And what I would do is I would break down my day into different segments and say that, for example, 7 to 8 a.m., that's my dedicated breakfast time. And during that time, I'm not going to open up my computer. I'm not going to look at my notes or look at my books. I'm just going to be eating breakfast with my family at that time. And then from 8 to 9, I'd be working on course A and only course A. I'm not going to do anything for course B. I'm not going to do anything for course C. I'm not going to water the plants or do my laundry during that time block. And then from 9 to 10, right, I would do only course B. And by having this very structured outline, this structured focus on how my day should look like, it really gave me that work-life balance, that school-life balance perspective back into my life. I wasn't opening up notebooks or textbooks at 11 p.m., 12 a.m. at night. I was doing things that mattered to me, doing the things that I hold a true value to them. So it really allowed me to make my days much more clear and much more focused. And as a result, I had better relationships with the people that I love around me. I was able to have dedicated time blocks each day to spend either through meals or I was going on walks with my parents during those dedicated time blocks. I was also able to set aside time blocks to call my friends. So overall, my personal relationships, they also strengthened. And I was able to get better sleep because I wasn't working when I was supposed to be sleeping, and I wasn't sleeping when I was supposed to be working. And it just gave me a whole new set of structure, a whole new perspective to how my days should go. And that's something that I truly, truly value. And I've learned a lot from that. I hope that this experience can also help the students and help the listeners to understand and to see what tools work best for you in terms of creating that structure in your life.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Karl. I love that structured piece and really sticking to it. That's really helpful. Brooklyn, how about yourself? Is there a story you can share about how you use a coping strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, one experience that really stands out would be my transition to medical school a few years ago. Coming from a background that was arts based, the transition to a very formal science based program in medicine was really difficult for me. And I was initially met with a lot of strong emotions of feeling inadequate, having really strong imposter syndrome experiences, and just really feeling like I wasn't cut out for the experience. That was something that sat really heavily with me. I found through chatting with peers and attending a school supported information sessions where they really actively combat some of these topics, it was really meaningful to hear from peers, faculty, the school itself that this is something a lot of people go through. It's very normal to have difficulties with transition, to feel this imposter syndrome, and to struggle learning how to change study strategies and manage our time differently. And so one thing that I think that really encouraged in me was to almost have this coping strategy of an antidote, sorry, to bad thoughts or to these difficult experiences. And so examples would be if I feel really isolated, I feel like I'm know nothing and I'm so stupid, I'm not supposed to be here. The antidote to that would be to talk to my peers, to prove that I'm not alone, to have these conversations and go, okay, we both don't understand this topic. Let's unpack that together. That's not a failure on my part. That's a part for us to work through something difficult together. Another antidote might be if I'm feeling really weak, I feel like I'm not strong enough to tackle this challenge. I'm not equipped with the skills to make it through this hardship. What's something that I can do to prove to myself that I have strength to overcome hard things? That might be doing a challenge in some other realm, like going for a run or going to a spin class. If I have this evidence, this antidote that I can do hard things, it kind of challenges this fallacy that I'm alone in my struggles or that I'm not strong enough to overcome these hardships. And so I found that having a specific ready to go coping strategy for each negative self-talk was really helpful because then it was an there was an automatic nature to, okay, I'm having this difficult thought about myself, my self-worth, my academic stress. What's the solution? What's something I can do that's easy and that actively challenges that difficult thought? And so maybe it's medical of me, but I thought having an antidote to these difficult thoughts was something that really resonated and helped me through that.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love that, having an antidote. And then I'm going to tell you, the imposter syndrome really never goes away. I've been uh, in social services for over 30 years, and the last 15 as a CEO. I still go into rooms and think, what am I doing here? Someone's going to finally figure out that I'm not, I shouldn't be here. And I mean, that's just your mind at work, right? Then you figure out everyone in the room's going to feeling the same way, and you're not alone for sure. So thank you for sharing, Brooklyn. Lily, how about yourself? Can you share a story about how you cope in a strategy that's worked for you in academics?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just to give a little bit of my story. So for a long time, I feel like I was actually very much that student that you had mentioned earlier in terms of always chasing that next A plus, having flashcards in my hand, running from classes, always staying up too late to study. And I really love learning, but let me tell you, it's very difficult to be a student. It is not easy. And there's so much focus on doing, like what I was mentioning in terms of getting good grades, getting work experience, volunteering, joining clubs, like the list goes on and on and on. I feel like it started to feel like my worth depended on how much I could accomplish. And there's so many things that add to that pressure, but a lot of it was actually coming from internal, like inside of me. In terms of, I think, a little bit on what Brooklyn you were talking about earlier, and that's really hard feeling to sit with, that I didn't actually feel like I was enough. And over time, I realized that no amount of achievements, even if I accomplished all of these things, that wasn't going to fill that gap that I was feeling. And I had to really learn to meet myself where I am, and to remind myself that my worth isn't something that I need to earn and something that's already there. It's defined by what I do, not defined by what I do. Sorry, it's not defined by what I do. It's actually defined by who I am and by those qualities that I'm bringing to the table, like Brooklyn, like you were mentioning, and how I show up in the world. And finding community, I would say, is likely one of my support mechanisms, because it means so much to have individuals around you that can support you and to help you in those ways that might be difficult. Having people to talk to, also being able to take care of myself and learning to treat myself with the kindness that I would offer to a friend. So really, like, pivoting those frames of mind has been so powerful in my journey. And I think when I look at support too, it's so difficult because we look at support and we're like, how can I support someone? Like, whether that's for parents or educators or friends, we think about that. And I think that what comes to mind for me is just asking people directly. Every person is different, asking them, and that might change, and that's okay. And redefining how we view success. Are you showing up? Are you putting in the effort? Those matter. Are we celebrating the small wins on the journey? It can be a long journey, especially when you're going to medical school. So, Brooklyn, whew, that sounds like a lot. um, but celebrating those small wins on that journey is so important, and reminding people that you're there for them. So for me, again, community, I think, is at the center of how I've been able to continue to go on. And I want to remind you that you are so much more than your grades. You're not defined by numbers or letters, and setting boundaries as well is so important. Just like knowing that some days you're going to be showing up at 100%, and some days you might be showing up at 40, and that's still enough. And you showing up with what you're able to, that's showing up fully. So I just wanted to reiterate that, because giving yourself boundaries, giving yourself grace throughout that period, alongside surrounding yourself with the right community, can be so, so important. And if there's one thing I'd want to leave people listening in today to take away from the conversation, it's that you're already enough just as you are, exactly as you are today. Like, you are enough. So I would just want to echo that sentiment towards listeners.
Sage advice. You are enough. In fact, sometimes you're more than enough, even more so. Thank you for that. And thank you all for sharing your different coping strategies, all a little different, all effective for yourselves for sure, and hopefully for some of our listeners as well. We have sadly come to almost to the end of the podcast, but we always have one final question we ask our guests, and that is really, what are your hopes for the future of youth mental health in Canada? And we'll start with Karl and go to Brooklyn and then end with Lily.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michael. Time flies when you're having fun, and it's been a blast so far to be here. And in terms of what I envision for youth mental health here in Canada, mental health to me holds a special place in my heart. And having been involved with Jack.org and many different initiatives, I've seen the power that a mental health champion can do for youth all across the country, from coast to coast. So I just hope that there are more organizations like Jack.org, or more initiatives within the Jack.org ecosystem, that we can help grow at a grassroots level, that we can help champion. And I just hope that if we can reach one more student today, that's 365 more youth that we can reach per year. That's 365 more young Canadians across the country that we can help advocate and help champion mental health towards. So I just think if we can do that, right, just one more youth a day, then that's a really solid milestone across a year, across multiple years. And I hope that I can be at the forefront of this. I hope I can work with amazing other leaders like Brooklyn, like Lily, like yourself, Michael, right, to help that make a reality. And I'm really excited to see what we can do. There are many, many, many pillars of hope that I see all around the country, and especially with so many different organizations like Jack.org coming it's really a hopeful and bright future. So I'm excited to see, and I hope that it is going to be a better future, and I'm sure we will do that.
Thanks so much, Karl. Absolutely. Brooklyn, what are your thoughts? What are your hopes for the future of youth mental health?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of my hopes would just be that youth continue to lean into their vulnerability. I think we saw even through our conversation today that when we're honest about our struggles, when we reach out for dialogue, when we have these helpful conversations, we only feel more connected and more empowered to continue reaching out and making community. And so I think my hope is that youth in times of isolation and in feelings of difficulty and challenge really lean into their vulnerability by asking for help, reaching for community, sharing their struggles, and kind of becoming a domino in this kind of cultural conversation that we're seeing across Canada. So I think that's my hope.
Thank you for that. Amazing. Lily, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just want to say that it's so beautiful, and this is a real tough act to follow when both of you have already said so many amazing things. So I completely resonate with all of what's been said already. But when I think about it, I think a lot about education, like starting education really early on and building mental health literacy into schools and beyond schools so that, youth can recognize and regulate their emotions, understand those coping strategies, and that coping looks different for every single person. And knowing when and who or where to seek support and help when it's needed. And just as important, like Brooklyn, what you were saying, like we need to keep breaking down stigma so it feels natural and safe for people to be engaging in these conversations on how they're doing in their day-to-day lives. It's so important. And I really resonate with what you were saying, Karl, in terms of I really hope that youth have the chance to be part of communities like Jack.org. I feel like spaces that like this space has been one that I felt so much belonging where you can make such a positive change and learn from others and you know use your voice for good to make a difference. And for me, being part of a community where I felt so seen, heard, and valued has been so powerful. So I think, Michael, to answer your question, my hope would really be to have youth, at the forefront of communities like that, and for youth to find communities like what I found with Jack.org.
Amazing. And listeners, we did not tell her to say that, but thanks, Lily. We appreciate that. It's so tough, I think, and I don't know if you'd all agree, right? When you go into post-secondary, right? I think you're at a stage in life you're asking yourself, you probably still are, like, who am I? What defines me, right? And we look for these things to define us. And kind of, in thinking about today's conversation, grades and academic success are one of those things. Maybe that defines me. Maybe I'm a scholar. Maybe I'm this. Maybe I'm an athlete. Like who am I and what makes me that? But I love today what I heard more and more of. It's not being the smartest person in the room. It's not your grade. It's not being the best athlete. It's not. It's all those other things like Brooklyn, you were mentioning, being a kind person, and that really your internal makeup, right? That we don't get to focus on. It's so important for youth these days to not be defined by just academic um, accomplishments, but it's also important too for them to know how to manage that because you're right, stress is going to exist. We can't just will it away. We don't have to see it as many of you have said, which is brilliant. Is that why do we see it as a bad thing? Let's reframe that. Let's think differently, and let's tackle it, and let's do different coping strategies like structuring it, or just kind of coming up with different ways of working through it. As you said, you push through. Incredible conversation. It's so important. And I'll tell you this: when I was in grade 8, I remember I did make a sports team, and I'm like, man, you know what? I'm not an athlete, so who am I? Like, what am I? If I'm not an athlete, what am I? And I got a good mark, kind of. And then I doubled down. And I thought, if I can't be an athlete, maybe I can be best in show at academics. And I did. And I remember the first semester, I got 78%. That's back when they didn't like it was harder. And I was second in class, and she wrote that, second in your class, way to go. I'm like, yeah, but I want to be first. So I doubled down. I was miserable. I put everything into it. I became obsessed with it, and it worked, right? Um, and the next one, I was saying, like 87, first in class, which was like, and it was probably for a minute, but if I looked outside of that adrenaline rush of getting that, being able to talk about, no one cared, like other than people like, oh, it's good, really care for a minute, but I wasn't happy, and I let it define me. And that's what happens sometimes when we let these things define us too. And they don't define us even when we fail. I'm talking about success. When it doesn't work, don't let that bad grade define you either. That's not who you are. It's part of life, right? We learn from those failures. Failure is actually a step towards success. And if you ask most successful people what they learn the most from, they'll talk about their failures and when they didn't succeed moving forward. But as always, we have had a brilliant panel. I want to thank you all for your honesty, your courage, for sharing from your personal experience. I'm so impressed. I leave every one of these podcasts so inspired by all of you. And we have some significant challenges in youth mental health and health across Canada, around the world. But what leaves me with a lot of hope, if I have to answer that question, are young people like you. You guys are brilliant, man. And we've seen in the podcast so far with our guests on, we are in good hands. We are in good shape for the future because we have so many brilliant young people who get it. We're so farther ahead than I was when I was your age. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your thoughts. And folks, tune in next week for another, well, not next week, it's every 2 weeks. Tune in again soon for another episode of Jack Amplified. We'll see you then.